Welcome to episode 2 of the dramatization of Bill Russo's book, Hauntin Taunton, The State Asylum. I'm your host for Short Story Theatre, Basil Nightingale. Before we set out on a new adventure, let's catch you up quickly on what has happened so far. James Wilkes was having horrible nightmares of an evil, sharp-clawed creature. A monster capable of walking on walls and ceilings, who had no mouth, and only circles of fire where there should have been eyes. Wilkes was terrified, and his screams were so loud that he woke up his neighbors. Every house for a quarter-mile was disturbed every night, in the darkest hours before dawn. After putting up with the situation for several weeks, they contacted the asylum, and had him committed. The director of the institution told him he might be confined for life. Locked up forever, in a place where the most violent and insane criminals in the nation were often placed in the same rooms as people like Wilkes, who suffered from bad dreams, or somebody who was judged to be a little slow, and should not be allowed to roam about in polite society. Then there was Cannibal, the lady cannibal. After she was captured, the authorities found dozens of jars of pickled fingers and toes in her house. Those jars were all that was left of the 24 people she killed and ate. But that monster we talked about. It roamed the hospital, looking for the one. It thought James Wilkes was the one, but did not harm Wilkes, and instead used the claws on the ends of its hands, where fingers should have been, to slice and dice Cannibal, and leave a nice little party platter of pieces of Cannibal for the guards to find in the morning. In episode 2, you're going to meet the hug and drug killer who makes Cannibal look like an amateur. We take you now to the asylum, the Taunton State Hospital, in the middle of the Bridgewater Triangle. Let's check in on poor James Wilkes, locked up perhaps forever because of his nightmares.
For reasons not explained to him, James Wilkes did not get a new roommate. He was instead transferred to a different building. He was placed in the Bristol wing and assigned to a new semi-private room. Wilkes reported to his new quarters on a Monday morning just after 9. The man with whom he'd be sharing the room was sitting in a chair next to his bed. With an old-fashioned quill pen, he was writing feverishly in a notebook that lay on top of the bed.
If you have a report for me, shipman, deliver it quickly. And leave. I'm too busy trying to find a way to save the ship to listen to any foolishness, so it better be important.
Well, excuse me, sir, but I've been assigned to this room under the orders of Dr. Mal. I am to share these quarters with you.
Dr. Mal is not the ship's physician, and I don't recognize you. State your business, or I'll call the watch and have you clapped in irons.
Dr. Mal is the head of this hospital, and he gave orders for me to share this room with you. By the way, who are you, anyway?
Why, I'm Captain Sumner, of course, and I must get this vessel back to Scotland. Who are you, anyway? And how did you get on board?
You may have been a captain, Captain Sumner, but right now, you're just another inmate at the Taunton State Hospital for the Insane. Welcome aboard.
I'm a bit foggy today. Let me put my papers down and try to think. Well, the problem is, I am a little mixed up, to tell you the truth. I remember now. They took my ship away from me. They said I was losing my mind. It's not true, of course, except that sometimes I do get confused.
We all do, Captain, we all do. Taunton State Hospital is a confusing place. Oh, by the way, my name is Jim Wilkes. I was put here in the hospital for having bad dreams.
Bad dreams? They can't throw a man in a loony bin for having nightmares.
Oh, they can, Captain. I'll explain that later, but first, tell me your story. How long have you been here?
I don't know. I remember that our ship was sailing from North Carolina back to our home port in Scotland. The sailing was smooth until we got just past Wales. First, we were becalmed. The sails were as still as a gravestone for 3 days. It was as if the ship were somehow glued to the same spot for 72 hours solid. That was bad, but it got worse, Jim.
Well, what could have been worse than that?
Cloud cover, my friend, cloud cover. We were totally socked in. Unless you've been a sailor, you wouldn't know that you cannot navigate if the sky is 100% cloudy. Once back in Australia, I was socked in for 2 days, but on this trip, it was 4 solid days. of not one single ray of light breaking through. I had never seen cloud cover so thick in all my days at sea.
So your ship couldn't move for 4 days because it was becalmed, not even a breeze. Then on the 5th day after the winds picked up, you couldn't go anywhere because of the cloud cover. Did it break on that 5th day?
Not really. But there was a tiny break in the clouds, and somehow, perhaps by divine inspiration, I invented a whole new system of navigation, based on that one tiny reading. No such system had ever been successful before my discovery. We quickly got back to Scotland where I published my findings, and became wealthy from the distribution of my celestial navigation books. Life for me was wonderful, for a few years until they cheated me out of everything.
Who cheated you, Captain? Who cheated you?
My wife. And her lover. They had me committed, saying that my mind was gone. They bribed the administrators of the hospital to go along with it. They came for me one day, chained me to a stretcher, and brought me here, and here I've been, ever since.
How long ago was that?
I don't know for sure. I can't even make a guess. But, I know that it's been a long, long time.
Due to Dr. Mall's latest report saying he was improving rapidly, Wilkes was assigned to the care of a new doctor, Martin Starling, a recent Harvard graduate. "Come into my office, Mr. Wilkes," said Dr. Starling, with a pleasant smile and a calming voice. Tall and lean, his brown hair was clipped close in a buzz cut, like a military man. "I'll be speaking with you every week from now on and I promise to do my best to help you." Not as grand as the director's suite, Dr. Starling's second-floor office was nonetheless impressive. It was airy, large, and well-furnished. A huge oak desk, planted in front of a massive window stretching from floor to ceiling, was the main feature. A pair of well-stuffed recliners on a side wall were placed on either side of a mahogany coffee table. "Don't be put off by that big gold desk," counseled the doctor. "I'm sorry to say, the builders of this hospital put much more thought into elegant buildings and offices than actual patient care. Let's sit in the chairs, Jim." "May I call you Jim?" "Yes, yes. Of course, please do, doctor," said Wilkes as he settled into the chair. At 57, he was balding but still trim, athletic, and attractive to women. He looked as though he'd do well playing on a men's senior softball team, which in fact he sometimes did. "Thanks, Jim, and while we're in here, I'm simply Marty, or Doc if you prefer. I've read your folder and I'm very impressed with your career." "Thanks, doctor, I mean Marty, but it wasn't really much. 30 years with my nose to the grindstone is all. In those 3 decades, starting as a teacher of geography, you rose through the ranks, became a vice principal, and won several awards. I'm pretty sure you were far above average in all respects," complimented the young psychiatrist, who was also a medical doctor. Right away Jim Wilkes felt at ease with this new situation and thought there was a good chance he'd get a quick release from the asylum, until the doctor spoke his next words. "Jim, I know you are not insane and you think you do not belong here, but you are very sick, and you may be in the hospital for some time. But I've never caused any trouble, you've seen my record." "I am." "It's the dreams, Jim," interrupted Dr. Starling. "I'm sure you don't realize it, but your nightmares were so intense that your screaming was heard for almost a mile in all directions of your house. The neighbors were concerned and frightened. After a while they called the police. When the officers drove their cruiser into your yard, they told the dispatcher that the shrieks sounded like they were coming from the gates of hell. They said there were 2 voices, one human and one that sounded like a wild beast. The officers, and not the neighbors, were the ones who got you committed." "I guess I didn't realize it was that bad. But the dreams have almost stopped since I've been here. Except for the night Cannibal was killed, I haven't had any. That alone may be reason enough to stay here, Jim. The asylum may be helping to lessen the number of episodes. We need to find out why you're having the dreams, before we can end them." For the rest of their first meeting, Dr. Starling tried to pin down exactly when the trouble started. "Before you retired from your teaching job, you traveled the country during the summer vacations?" "Yes, I've always been interested in people and places. I've visited just about every state in the Union as well as Canada and Mexico. One year I did Europe in 7 weeks. I love to visit new places, and this hobby of mine was a great help in my work as a teacher of geography. That's one of the perks of teaching, Jim. You have the whole summer to do whatever you want. Most teachers aren't that lucky, Marty. They have family obligations and such. My wife died a few years after we were married and we had no children. She left me a little money and my expenses were low, so I was able to go pretty much wherever I wanted. I think we've made a good start today, Jim." Next week we'll talk about the first time you had the nightmares, and perhaps we'll get lucky and find out why you started having them. By the way, how do you like your new roommate? Captain Sumner? He seems like a brilliant man. I know he's a bit forgetful, but how could they have stolen his money and his book rights, and gotten him declared insane? The poor guy's been here a long time. Yes. You could say more than 100 years, Jim. Captain Thomas Hubbard Sumner really did invent an innovative navigation system, and he really was committed to Taunton State Hospital. But Jim, he was sent here in the 1800s. That's impossible, Doc. That would make the man in that room close to 200 years old. No, Jim, that would make the man in that room legally insane. Captain Sumner died in 1876. So he's just pretending to be the real captain? Think where you are. Taunton State Hospital, the asylum. I guess that poor man somehow just latched onto the idea that he was a famous ship captain of the 1800s. He's been here for more than 10 years, and has always maintained that he really is a captain who invented a new system of navigation. We have no idea who he actually is, but he's harmless, unlike that new female patient. Have you heard about her? No, I haven't heard anything about any new patients. Well, this lady is going to be very famous. I've got a whole folder of newspaper articles about her. I've heard that there are 4 or 5 books being written about her, as well as a few movies in production. Her name is Ivy, Poison Ivy. She earned that nickname by killing more than 100 people.
The most famous resident of Taunton State Hospital would have been Lizzie Borden of Fall River, who is said to have taken an axe, and used it to give her father 40 whacks, and when she was done, give her mother 41. While awaiting trial for the brutal murders, Lizzie claimed that she was held in Taunton State Hospital. In actual fact, she was confined for 10 months nearby, in the old Bristol County Jail, on Hodges Avenue in the city of Taunton, but for reasons unknown, throughout the rest of her life she refused to admit that she never resided at the infamous asylum. Though Borden was found innocent by a jury in New Bedford, many people, even to this day, consider her a double-axe murderer, and her false report of staying at the Taunton Asylum merely adds to the institution's reputation for horror and the bizarre. The most infamous person who actually was confined to the Taunton Asylum was Ivy Sutter, known as Poison Ivy for her ambition to be the all-time champion serial killer. Her horrible tally of 100 victims did indeed make her the worst multiple murderer in history. She has since lost her title to Luis the Beast, Gavito of South America, who slaughtered at least 140 boys. He was captured and convicted in 1999. He was not sent to an insane asylum, but to a general population prison, where he resides to this day, slowly serving out his sentence of 1,853 years, and 9 days. Like a lot of people, including Gavito, Ivy Sutter was not able to overcome a horrible childhood. While Ivy was still in infancy, her mother died under mysterious circumstances. Though her father, a tailor of barely adequate skills, was suspected of involvement, he was never charged. Scarcely able to feed and clothe himself, let alone care for a child, he struggled along as best he could. During the early 1930s, years of great poverty in the United States, little Ivy, an intelligent girl, helped her dad as much, or even more than could be expected, of a 4-year-old child. One afternoon, he sent Ivy on an errand, to the store next door to his tiny shop. When she returned, she found to her horror, that her father was sewing his own eyelids together. Carted away to the Taunton Asylum, he survived for 3 more years, before bleeding to death, in the basement torture chambers, after a botched ice pick lobotomy. Right after her father was committed, little Ivy was dispatched to an orphanage, and later, to a series of horrid foster homes, where she suffered extensive physical and mental abuse, over a 10-year period. Taking note of her innate intelligence, a well-meaning official of the welfare department, procured a job for 14-year-old Ivy at the Whittington Hospital, not far from the asylum. The work was hard, consisting of floor scrubbing, changing bedpans, lifting patients, and other menial chores. Within months, Ivy's personality underwent a dramatic change, from sullen and quiet, to outgoing and pleasant. Her emaciated frame quickly filled out, revealing an attractive young woman, whose presence had a notable and positive effect on patients. Promoted to nurse's aide, young Ivy showed a great deal of promise in her work, especially with the most severe cases. A little more than 6 months later, the director of the hospital summoned her to his office, and offered to enroll her in the institution's nursing program. Delighted, Ivy accepted, and fully applied herself to her studies. After a year, near the top of her class, she was given regular nursing shifts. Her teachers were impressed with her abilities in the hospital, as well as with her work in the classroom. The only criticism they had, and it was a mild one, was her fascination with autopsies. She never missed a chance to assist in the grim work of dissection, and was occasionally seen caressing the cadavers. At the beginning of her second year as a student nurse, Ivy claimed to be baffled when 2 of her patients died under mysterious circumstances. After a third person expired similarly, she was quietly dismissed from the nursing school without a certificate. Fearing bad publicity that might hurt the institution's prestige as well as its finances, the director didn't file a report with the police, but was convinced that Ivy was responsible for the deaths. In his private journal he wrote, "She is obsessed with autopsies and has been observed embracing corpses in the same manner a woman might caress a lover." Further, she seems to have been experimenting with morphine, using her patients as lab animals, by alternately diminishing and increasing dosages to see the effects of the drug. It was reported to me that she was observed lying in bed with her victims as they died. Since the patients were seriously ill to begin with, it would be difficult to prove Ivy guilty of murder. The best thing I can do is discharge her from her duties and from the nursing school. Lesser girls might have been set back by the dismissal, but the resourceful Ivy simply forged herself a nursing certificate, using forms she previously pilfered, and began a decade-long career as a private nurse. Her first job was the care of a wealthy old man in a nursing home. The facility was a good one and well-staffed, but his family wanted the additional security of a personal private nurse, on duty 24 hours a day. Ivy was given a room adjoining the 93-year-old man's, and was instructed to take over his nutrition, as well as his medications. Under her gentle ministrations the old gentleman rallied, and was much improved for several months. His grateful relatives gave Ivy generous bonuses. One evening near the end of her 5th month of employment, Ivy told her patient that she had a special surprise for him.
"I'm just going to adjust your medicine a tiny bit to make you more comfortable, dear. I'm giving you an extra bag, a secondary bag of fluid, hanging just below your primary drip. As the new fluid combines with the contents of the other bag, you will feel extreme pleasure, from the new medication I have gotten, just for you. And I will see the rapture in your face and I will share your delight. You will feel excellent. And now for the rest of the surprise. I'm going to lie down beside you to keep you nice and warm. I will pull back the covers, and crawl into bed with you, and I will hug you, while you enjoy the wonderful medicine. Oh no, dear. Don't lose consciousness. I'll hug you tighter, but don't pass out yet. It's too soon, dear."
"We can't have you going so quickly," Ivy said, throwing off the blanket, and jumping up from the bed. She rapidly turned off the secondary drip, which contained 800 milligrams of morphine. Enough to kill 13 average-sized men. Returning to the bed, she began rubbing the old man's cheeks, massaging his hands, and then directing her ministrations to his back. Dropping still lower, she groped his pelvic area, before sliding her supple hands to the front of his pajamas. When she began stroking the 93-year-old man's private parts, his cheeks flamed, his breathing quickened, and he opened his eyes. "Oh, you're back," she gushed. "I was afraid you left me." "It's too soon, dear," she stated. Getting up to readjust the drips, she reopened the flow of the secondary bag. For nearly an hour Ivy played her game of hug and drug, taking the old man to the doorstep of death and then dragging him back to life. Finally, she opened the secondary drip as wide as possible and the aged man breathed his last. Removing the secondary bag and hiding the evidence, she rushed to the front desk, to file a report claiming that her charge died of natural causes, peacefully in his sleep. Ivy wasn't questioned after the death, nor was she suspected of foul play, even after 5 more of her patients died in mirror fashion. Emboldened by her success, Ivy strove for bigger things, more plentiful opportunities to kill. She applied to, and was accepted at one of the most prestigious hospitals in Boston, the capital of Massachusetts, and the largest city in New England. As many as 60 patients succumbed to the hug and drug killer during her 3-year spree at, the name has been redacted, hospital. It was one of the nation's most modern and advanced medical facilities. As always, the crafty Ivy was so skilled in her horrid work, that there was never any direct evidence to link her with the deaths. There was, however, increasing suspicion. Looking for a way to quietly dismiss her, the director of nursing began tracking exactly how much medication was being administered to Ivy's charges. In a move that was uncommon in the early and mid-1900s, Ivy was terminated for recklessly overprescribing opiates. In the 2000s there have been a number of medical people similarly disciplined, but in Ivy's day it was virtually unheard of. Once again Ivy escaped criminal charges, and there was no public record of her misanthropy to harm her chances of continued employment as a nurse. Steering clear of public institutions, for the next 3 years Ivy went private. She played it safe for a while, taking only patients that were already in end-of-life situations. This allowed her to play hug and drug, with absolutely no questions asked, when her victims expired. After another 15 or 20 murders, Ivy grew restless and once again desired multiple kills, instead of mere singletons. She moved to tiny East Ham on outer Cape Cod, where she was convinced that the lack of a nearby hospital would make her work easier. She soon found a wealthy family that traced its roots and fortune to the whaling industry of Cape Cod's glory days. She moved in with the Crosby family, at their summer home, an immense 3-story mansion overlooking Cape Cod Bay. While sunning herself on First Encounter Beach, on a hot July afternoon, Ivy concocted perhaps her most evil plan. She was hired primarily to take care of old Nate Crosby, whose consumption was so severe he was not expected to last a month. Ivy fell in love with Cape Cod, and decided to fix it so that she could stay on the pretty island for as long as possible. Surprising everyone, the 83-year-old patriarch improved dramatically under the ministrations of the pretty and perky nurse, Ivy Sutter. The happiness of the household was cut short when Mr. Crosby's much younger wife died suddenly, of a virulent stomach ailment. Just after Mrs. Crosby's funeral, her 3 young children from a previous marriage also contacted the mysterious disorder, and they too perished. As for Ivy, she was thrilled with her success. Instead of the old hug and drug, her mainstay for years, she was now killing with arsenic, the substance that would earn her the nickname, Poison Ivy. In the face of all the heartbreak in his mansion, the old fellow, Nate Crosby, was in resurgence. He left his bed, was taking walks, and looked 10 years younger. Despite his sadness at losing his family, he had a new interest in life, his shapely young nurse. In 6 months' time, wedding bells rang for Ivy and old Nate. 3 months later, funeral bells tolled for the poor fellow, when he perished from Ivy's loving hug and drug treatment. As it turned out, that was Poison Ivy's last stand. The surviving members of Crosby's family, including the grown children from his first marriage, brought in medical experts from the Boston hospital, where Ivy had murdered 60 people. They couldn't prove anything in the old man's death, because hug and drug done right is almost foolproof, but when they exhumed and autopsied the late Mrs. Crosby and the children, the experts found solid evidence that they died from contact with Poison Ivy. Under questioning by Cape Cod police, Ivy cheerily admitted her crimes. Giving details of dozens of her murders, she proudly stated, "I want to be the greatest serial killer of all times." Ivy was arrested, and formally charged with 4 murders. In Taunton Superior Court, she was found innocent, by reason of insanity, and sentenced to confinement for life in the Taunton State Insane Asylum. "Sit down, Jim," said Dr. Marty Starling as Wilkes entered the doctor's office for his weekly session. "Have you been? Any problems, any dreams?" "No, Marty, none at all. I can honestly say I feel great." "That's good news. Sometimes these issues go away on their own, but we've still got work to do. We need to find out when and why the nightmare started. You told me to give that some thought, and I have. I'm sure that my last trip to Mexico was where and when it all began. Did you go there during a summer vacation?" "I did make a few visits to Mexico when I was teaching, but this particular trip was after I retired. When I was working I had to travel in the heat of summer, but this time I was able to go in the cooler weather. My plan was to drive from Massachusetts to Arizona, where I'd spend a week or two in a Wild West town called Bisbee before crossing into Mexico. Have you ever heard of Bisbee, Doc? It's an old mining town, surrounded by mountains, I believe. That's true. Bisbee was a gold rush boomtown. After the mines played out, the town shrunk from more than 10,000 people down to about half that. Though the population changed, nothing else did. Today, it still looks the same as it did about 100 years ago in the mid-1800s. Except for the cars on it, instead of horses, Main Street is still like a Wild West city, complete with saloons, dancing girls, pool halls, and barroom brawls. Visitors commenting about the quirky community on the Mexican border say, Bisbee is the highest town in America, and not just for the elevation. Most people who tour the town are impressed by its frontier persona, but I had a different feeling right from the start. Partly it was the Christmas lights. I got there in the middle of October, arriving about 7 o'clock at night. There was nobody on the streets. No cars and no pedestrians. It seemed like the town was deserted, but there were Christmas lights blazing and twinkling everywhere. They were strung across the roadway, wrapped around windows and doors, draped around phone poles and draped over the outside stairways. The whole village looked like one giant Christmas tree, but there was not a soul in sight. Tired from 12 hours on the road, I looked for a Motel 6 or similar hotel, but there were none. Not a single Holiday Inn or a Ramada. There was just one lodging place, a hotel in the center of town, called the Copper Queen. It looked like it was just built yesterday, as long as yesterday was sometime in October around 1880. I parked my car and walked up the steps to the entrance of the hotel, braving the October Christmas lights, which by now seemed much more eerie than cheery. After I opened the front door and walked inside, I was sure it actually was 1880 all over again. Behind the front desk were dozens of pigeonhole boxes like you see in old movies, for mail, room keys, and messages to hotel guests. There wasn't a single person in the lobby, and not a sound interrupted the total silence that enveloped the dimly lit room. An ominous-looking man who seemed even older than the hotel stood mute and unmoving behind the reception desk. I wasn't even sure he was alive until he slowly turned his head, looked at me with glaring eyes and said, or at least I think he said, "There is no room for you here." I'm not an especially brave man, doctor, but I've never run from a fight in my life. And yet when that old man spoke to me in his icy voice, I felt the temperature drop 20 degrees in 2 seconds. Shivering, I wheeled about and sprinted down the steps like a racehorse, got in my car, and headed for Mexico as fast as I could.
Well, I don't know to this day if that clerk in the hotel was human or a ghost, but I never looked back until I was safely in the industrial city of Agua Prieta in the state of Sonora, Mexico. The city has about 100,000 residents and is pretty prosperous. It played a big role in the Mexican Revolution. As soon as I hit the streets, I saw right away it wasn't one of those cheap hangout places that you hear so much about. There were no street peddlers selling knockoff watches, sunglasses, or any other paraphernalia. After a quick look around, I felt tired. I booked a hotel room. Before going up to my quarters, I went to the duty-free shop and bought a bottle of scotch. Johnny Walker Gold Label Reserve. I paid $19 for the bottle, which would have been at least $50 had I purchased it in Arizona. It was a great find. I'm not much of a drinker, but on the occasions I want a highball, I want the best. I expected the bottle would last my entire vacation. I certainly did not expect to be sharing it with anybody else. But outside the shop was another great find, Jose, although I did not know it then. Jose looked just about like you'd expect a middle-aged Mexican man to look. Dark hair, well-trimmed mustache, dungarees, also called jeans in some parts of the country, and an untucked flower-patterned long-sleeve shirt. Jose had no jacket, even though the temperature was in the 40s.
Buenos días, senor, soy José. That means, I am José. Han vivido in Mexico, me toda vida. Lived here, my entire life, and know this city, better than anyone. I speak English, a little bit. José will be your guide to Agua Prieta. This will be, for gratis. It will cost you no dinero.
Hello, Jose. My name is Jim Wilkes. I didn't quite understand all of what you said, but I think you offered to be my guide. Thanks for the offer, Jose, but I'm going to be just fine on my own.
No, senor. You will not be fine. Me saw you left the room in the hotel, and me saw the danger you are in. That is the reason Jose followed you.
What are you talking about, Jose? I didn't have any trouble.
But, Senor Wilkes, you will have trouble, and it will happen later today. If you will walk back to the hotel with me, I can prove what I'm saying. Even just being on the street in that neighborhood puts you in grave danger, but I'll keep you safe. No charge, no dinero. However, if you'd care to offer me some of what's in that bottle after the trouble is gone, me won't object.
Jose, I can't understand half of what you're saying, but somehow I believe you. But I can't imagine how I'm going to have a problem since the neighborhood looks fine and there's a beautiful little church right next door to my hotel. Chattering on like nonstop like a prisoner just let out of a month in solitary, Jose chewed my ear off all the way across town, telling me the history of the city as well as lurid tales of the upcoming holidays, Los Días de las Muertes, the days of the dead. You should be on the radio, Jose. You tell a great story. Look, we're passing a shoe store. I'd like to go in and see if they have any Western boots. Inside the store, an elderly man behind the counter was assisted by two young boys, probably about 11 or 12. Hola! Quiero comprar algunos cowboy boots. ¿Tiene algo? I wasn't sure what I said exactly. I'm still not positive it was right. But the boys piped up instantly. Hello, senor. This is our grandfather's shop. He doesn't speak English, but he does have some great Western boots. Thanks, guys. But you're speaking English, and I'm trying to learn your language, so if you don't mind, please talk to me in Spanish. The boys told me their home is in Arizona, and they were visiting their grandfather for the holidays. And they wanted to practice their English with me. So we compromised by speaking mostly Spanglish. The grandfather showed me several pairs of high-quality boots. As soon as he brought out an elegant black leather concho style with a harness of silver, I said, "Those are the ones I want." The boots had a silver plate partially covering the toe, and a removable leather harness studded with silver medallions. Previously, when I stopped in Tucson for a couple days, I had seen similar gear for over $200. So my new friend Jose said something to the owner of the store, speaking so rapidly in Spanish I didn't get a word. One of the boys smiled and told me, "Señor, mi abuelo, my grandfather, says that the special price for you for these boots is 100 pesos. That's it? That's it? Only 100 pesos? That's $10 in American money. See, that is the special price for you. Our grandfather appreciates you are trying to speak Spanish with him without demanding that he try to speak English. He said you are a good representative of your nation." When we were outside, I commented, "Jose, I think you had something to do with that deal that I got. So how about a little breakfast before we continue?" "Si, senor, I know a fine place," he said. "Call me Jim, Jose." So he led me to a cantina that was closed, and I felt a little uneasy. "Jose, this is a bar room. I wanted breakfast," I told him. "And even if I did want a drink, the place is all shut up. It's all closed." "Momento, Jim," he said. "Momento, just a minute." He tapped on a window near the entryway. In a moment, a burly young man in an apron opened the door and told us to come in. "Juan, I would like you to meet a good friend of mine. He is an Americano. His name is Senor Jim, said Jose. Buen dia. Buenos dias, senor. Please, scusi. No speak English mucho good. In my best Spanish, I told Juan that his English was a lot better than my Spanish, and we talked back and forth for a time in a mishmash of both languages. Senor Jim is hungry, Juan. Can you fix him a breakfast? Jose asked. Going into the kitchen, Juan quickly prepared huevos rancheros, corn tortillas filled with eggs, and a tomato sauce spiced with just a hint of chili powder. On the side were frijoles, beans, and papas fritas, fried potatoes. Juan brought my food on a steaming platter along with a pot of coffee, but there was nothing for Jose. But what about my amigo? I asked. Juan said, Jose prefers something a little more substantial for his breakfast. Well, whatever he wants, I'll be happy to pay for it, I said. Juan went into the bar and came back holding a tray containing a 12-ounce bottle of Tecate Cerveza, beer, and a 2-liter bottle of Jose Cuervo tequila. Jose drank a huge swallow of the Cuervo straight from the bottle, and he washed it down with about half of the Tecate. Before long, he needed another Tecate to help him wash down the rest of the Jose Cuervo. It was almost 1 p.m. when we walked out of Juan's cantina. Well, I walked out, but Jose looked like a tightrope walker struggling to stay on the tightrope, even though in Jose's case the tightrope was a whole sidewalk. Do not worry, Senor Jim, I'm fine, he claimed as he stopped for a moment to anchor himself to a utility pole. I'm okay. Just a little woozy because I forgot to have salt and lime with my breakfast. Speaking of breakfast, mine was great, Jose. I've never had better. This was an unexpected pleasure. Getting my breakfast, my best breakfast ever, in a bar that wasn't even open. I think I'm going to like having you for a guide, mi amigo. After a minute or two hugging the pole, Jose declared himself fit for duty and resumed walking much more steadily than before. The afternoon was cool, even though there was a strong sun. Loud, vibrant mariachi music blared from every storefront as we strolled along Main Street. All of the people were happy. Most of them waved at us and they said, Buenas tardes, señores, buenas tardes. Good afternoon, gentlemen. And we replied, Que no, which means yes, isn't it? Even though, literally translated, it's something like, but no. The longer we walked, the more I was convinced that Jose was a well-meaning guy, but completely wrong about the danger factor. Passing the little white adobe church next to my hotel, I was certain I had nothing to fear. I was fascinated by a shiny 20-peso Mexico coin I picked up somewhere. A shiny coin, and I was flipping it up in the air when the church doors opened. The 6 men who walked out of the church were not padres or even parishioners. Each one looked like his wanted poster would be in every town's top 10. They all had long, unkempt hair and scruffy beards. Their short-sleeved shirts revealed arms with so many tattoos that there was little skin that had not been inked. Put that coin away right now, Jose snapped at me. Jose, it's $2 American money. 20 pesos, $2. I protested. Jim, many people in this city do not see $2 in a whole week. Put it in your pocket now. I did as Jose suggested, but it was too late. The 6 sour-faced men looked at me and grinned. Like bulky linemen on an American football team, they advanced on me with evil intentions. The biggest and most fearsome member of the crew was in the lead, with the other 5 lined up right behind him. Drawing a thin-bladed knife from somewhere under his shirt, he held it up chest-high in front of him. "Your money, gringo! Ahora! Ahora! Right now! Give us a pocket full of dinero and maybe we won't hurt you too bad." "No, senor! No! Momento! Por favor! Escuche! Listen to me!" said Jose as he jumped in front of me to plead with the thugs. In rapid Spanish, most of which was far too fast for me, Jose spun some sort of a yarn about me being connected with a powerful Patriarcha mob in Providence, Rhode Island. Whatever tale he cooked up, it worked. The 6 punks grumbled, scowled, and slinked away without harming me or robbing me. Those men were from Los Malandros Prieta, the Agua Prieta thugs, the biggest and worst gang in the whole state, Jose said. Jose told me he convinced them that I was from the Patriarcha gang of Providence. They have heard of it, and they were most impressed. They don't want to risk a war with a crew from the United States over the few $100s they figured to get from you. But Jose, why does the church allow them inside? It's not a church anymore, Jim. The parish was closed down, the gang took it over. It's the headquarters for the whole club now. That is how I knew you were headed for trouble. So I thanked Jose for saving me, and for his bravery. I offered him $20 American and my bottle of Johnny Walker Gold Label Reserve. He quickly snapped up the scotch, but he would not take the cash. I persevered, and he finally accepted it with a smile on the condition that I allow him to return the next day and continue as my tour guide. No other way, Jose. I will have it no other way. I'll see you at 9 tomorrow morning. Just then the doctor in the asylum, Dr. Starling, looked at his watch and noted that the hour for our session had expired. "That's a fascinating story, Jim," said the doctor, "and I want to hear the rest, but we're going to have to stop now. I'll see you back here same time next week."
And so closes this chapter of Hauntin Taunton, the State Asylum, by Bill Russo. In the next episode we'll return to the asylum and encounter the beast with the eyes of fire, as it searches for poison ivy, the hug and drug killer. We'll also travel back to Mexico, during the Days of the Dead, where Jim Wilkes and Jose find that the myth of the dead returning from their coffins is based on the case of one man who was put in a maximum security jail and guarded intensely, even though he was dead. For it is said that he regularly escapes from his Cajada Cartel, his prison box. So please join us for the conclusion of Hauntin Taunton. It will also be the final episode of Season 1 of Short Story Theatre. It is hoped that Season 2 will start in November of 2020. This is Basil Nightingale, speaking for Bill Russo, and all of the cast of our little theatre, inviting you to come back again real soon. Won't you?